Shakif Madapiri gives us some life. Zochitika, 7 till 8 p.m. Maria Mokumalo comes in 8 till 9. We get some useful knowledge. Kalodiscopia, 9 till 10. We take a look in Africa and beyond. Africa World Hour with Sipiso Makwetla. And we close it up with some love. The Hotlines with Shailen Dikumana, 10 till 12 p.m. on Channel Africa. Across borders, across time zones, on air, online. This is Channel Africa. Africa has a voice, and that voice is Channel Africa. It keeps you in motion, speaking, singing, questioning, rising. Wake up with Rise and Shine, 6 till 9. Peter and Asanda, as they bring you breaking news, sharp analysis, and the voices that shape the day. At mid-morning, we get on the move with Palisa and Benjamin, digging into the African lifestyle, people, and the things that make Africa smile. 12 till 1, Africa Update with...
And it's titled Mood. What mood are you in today? Well, I'm in the mood to hear what's coming up on the Africa Update. Lulu Gaboo is, of course, here to let us know what's coming up. Good morning, Lulu.
Good morning. It's a good mood. It
is a good mood. I'm glad.
So, today we're focusing on the big story globally. This is the Israel-Iran escalation of bombardments between both countries. There's a call for a ceasefire, and they've called for a ceasefire, but the U.S. has basically said, and a number of countries have come out and stated that they believe Israel has every right to defend itself. So we're going to unpack exactly what this means with Nick Harper, because if we look at just some of the responses from some of the leaders, does it really make sense? Who made the first move? And, they must bring us in as the layman for us to have a better understanding as to why this is happening. Nuclear issue. Have they confirmed that Iran has the nuclear that they claim Iran has? And does Iran have every right to defend itself? Like everyone calling out, saying Israel has a right to defend itself. So it's something we'll unpack. Loss of life, which is always a difficult situation. And then also the G7 Leaders Summit, which is underway in Canada, divisions between the core groups emerging after U.S. President signaled he would not sign onto a joint statement for the de-escalation between Israel and Iran. The question is why?
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll be able to get more information from that. And then people with disabilities in institutions face a higher risk of trafficking due to their dependence on caregivers. So they are often depicted as vulnerable and are easily exploited. So we'll unpack that also. So all that and more coming up on Africa Update today.
Thank you, Lulu. We look forward to those conversations for today. Keep tuned in right here on Channel Africa. The Africa Update is coming up. And of course, you'll see us, the On the Move team, again tomorrow. So let's hang out again tomorrow right here on Channel Africa. Playing you out with this one. This one is titled Sade.
There, through every shift, every milestone, and every triumph. Not just reporting history, but shaping the conversations that define Africa's future. For brands, media planning, and advertisers, Channel Africa is more than just a platform. It's an opportunity. With 25 compelling shows covering current affairs, sports, business, music, and lifestyle, we deliver an engaging Pan-African audience ready to connect, invest, and act. Multi-award winning, internationally recognized, digitally accessible across the globe. When Africa speaks, the world listens, and Channel Africa makes sure of it. For business, for culture, for Africa, partner with Channel Africa, because Africa's voice is the future. Africa is a story. A living, breathing, ever-evolving masterpiece. And for over 5 decades now, one voice has told it like no other. Channel Africa. More than just a broadcaster, Channel Africa is the pulse of the continent. African-led. Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
is Africa Update, coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa on Channel Africa Radio from an African perspective. I'm Lulu Gaboo. I'm in studio with Noluthando Buthelezi, Nosipho Zuma and Fikile Lingwati. Coming up in this hour.
The question is all about whether this is a push for peace or putting the US on a footing for war. He has told his National Security Council to be ready. He's told them to get the Situation Room at the White House prepared for when he lands.
US President has left the G7 summit, citing the conflict in the Middle East.
The Sudanese ambassador in Iran confirmed that he received the order and the evacuation process has started.
And Sudanese nationals in Iran have been ordered to evacuate. But first up, the news with Noluthando Buthelezi and our sports headlines with Fikile Lingwati.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thanks, Lulu, and good afternoon. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has posthumously pardoned the Ogoni 9, a group of environmental activists, among them the late Ken Saro-Wiwa, who were executed by a military regime nearly 3 decades ago for protesting oil pollution in the Niger Delta. But the move has been met with sharp criticism from Ogoni leaders, who say that a mere pardon falls far short of justice. Nigeria coordinator of the Ogoni Solidarity Forum, Celestine Okpobari.
The president of Nigeria is one of the most powerful presidents in the world. So what I expect Mr. President to do, if he has no power to exonerate, or to set up a judicial panel of inquiry, to do a review of the kangaroo trial, to look at the trial of Justice Alta, and do a review of what happened, how the lawyers of Ken Saro-Wiwa were chased out of the tribunal. All those things, they're supposed to look at it, and I know that such a panel will recommend exoneration. I also would have loved Mr. President to set up another panel to look at the military occupation of Ogoni land, how the military occupied our land, because those that committed genocide in Ogoni are walking freely on the streets of Nigeria. It shouldn't be.
The South African National Defence Forces Chief Joint Operations Lieutenant General Siphiwe Sangweni says that concerns that soldiers from the Democratic Republic of Congo have come back without their weapons is misplaced. General Sangweni says that 80% of the SANDF equipment and weapons have already been moved to Tanzania, and the process to bring them back home is likely to take months. He says that the weapons were moved when soldiers moved from Goma to Tanzania. The fourth group of soldiers returning from the SADC peacekeeping mission in the DRC is expected to land at Bram Fischer International Airport today in Bloemfontein in the Free State province.
The weapons and equipment are coming back. It does not imply that they are carrying those weapons as of now. So there is a process currently underway of equipment being transported from Tanzania, where currently almost 80% have been moved from Goma up to the transit camp in Tanzania. As we indicated previously, that because our equipment is quite big, then they will be taken or moved by sea.
South Africa's presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya says that President Cyril Ramaphosa will continue to assert citizens in the country's calls for de-escalation and conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere during his deliberations at the G7 Leaders Summit in Canada. Ramaphosa will later today engage in the leaders' outreach session focused on energy security, but geopolitical tensions are likely to be addressed on the margins of the forum in the president's bilateral meetings with a number of leaders. Magwenya says that South Africa will continue to play a supporting role in ending conflicts.
For some time now, President Ramaphosa has been quite consistent in calling for the de-escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Part of that call was to ensure that this conflict that we've seen in Gaza does not extend to the rest of the region. And so one of Canada's priorities for this G7 is the strengthening of peace and stability, where we're going to align with position insofar as calling for a peaceful resolution of all conflicts. Russia and Ukraine, India and Pakistan, Iran and Israel now. We will continue making that call that those conflicts have to stop.
Sudanese Prime Minister Kamil Idris has instructed the country's ambassador in Tehran to organize the safe evacuation of all Sudanese citizens from Iran amid Israeli strikes. Naba Muhadian in Sudan reports.
The evacuation order comes few days after Iran launched long-range missiles targets in Tel Aviv in a response to Tel Aviv air raids against many Iranian cities over the weekend, including the capital Tehran, that killed tens of civilians and destructed military and civilian infrastructure. The Sudanese ambassador in Iran confirmed that he received the order and the evacuation process has started. There is tens of families, including students, are stuck in Tehran, but the process has already started. There is also fears of wider extension of the conflict, Iran-Israel conflict in the Middle East region and Gulf area.
Togo has suspended broadcasts of French state-funded international news outlets RFI and France 24 for 3 months, accusing them of a lack of impartiality and strictness. The suspension comes as tensions are rising between the country's leader, Faure Gnassingbe, and the opposition. Two opposition parties, the Democratic Forces for the Republic and the National Alliance for Change, called for a constitutional coup that could extend his rule for life. RFI and France 24 have been covering opposition protests against the new constitution that created his new role. In a joint statement, both outlets reaffirmed their commitment to journalistic principles and said that their management was willing to clear up any misunderstanding with the authority. For any news stories that you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I am Nolutando Butelezi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headline, Tunisian heavyweights Esperance opened their 2025 FIFA Club World Cup campaign with a 2-0 defeat and ascend to the top of Group D table. Taylor Fritz has reclaimed his place in the top 4 of the ATP rankings following his Stuttgart victory. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
Well, thank you to Nolutando Butelezi with our news update and Figile Lingwati with our sports headlines. It is 12:08 Central African Time and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa on DSTV's audio bouquet channel 802, an OpenView channel 628 and on www.channelafrica.co.za as well as on the SABC Plus app available on the Apple and Google Play stores. Join us in conversation on our social media platforms. That's on X, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. On Facebook at Channel Africa, you can also send us your comments and voice notes to +2763 that's 406-9126 #Africa Update and let us know which country you're in. And if you have any stories that you'd like us to highlight or to focus on, send us an email. It is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call on +2711 714 4459. Now today on #Africa Update Us, Nigeria, Sudan and South Africa are a few of the countries on the continent calling for peace in the Middle East. What would you tell the leaders of Iran and Israel if you had their ear? What would you tell the leaders of Iran and Israel if you had their ear? Share your thoughts on all our social media platforms. On X, Instagram at Channel Africa 1, on Facebook at Channel Africa. And send us your comments and voice notes on +2763, that's 406-9126. #Africa Update Us.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
Sudan's Prime Minister Kamil Idris has ordered the Sudanese ambassador in Tehran to carry out a safe evacuation of all Sudanese nationals from Iran as Israel conducted a series of intense airstrikes on Iranian cities, including Tehran. Naba Mokhadian reports from Sudan.
The evacuation order comes few days after Iran launched long-range missiles at targets in Tel Aviv in a response to Tel Aviv air raids against many Iranian cities over the weekend, including the capital Tehran, that killed tens of civilians and destructed military and civilian infrastructure. The Sudanese ambassador in Iran confirmed that he received the order and the evacuation process has started. There is tens of families, including students, are stuck in Tehran, but the process has already started. There is also fears of wider extension of the conflict, Iran-Israel conflict in the Middle East region and Gulf area. On Friday, the Sudanese government condemned the attack carried out by Israel and called for de-escalation and the international community to interfere and stop the escalation, as it will impact many countries, including the Gulf area, Middle East, and Arab countries. The situation in Iran is worrying, and the raids between the two countries continue to kill civilians, and of course it's alarming of a wider escalation on the ground that will affect of course millions of people who live there. Naba Muhiddin, Port Sudan, in Sudan.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
It is 12 after 12 Central African time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Our call for a ceasefire has been made as tensions between Israel and Iran escalated over the last few days. Israel first launched its attack on Iran on Friday, with Iran retaliating, resulting in the loss of lives on both sides. Now, an Israeli strike hit Iran's state broadcaster, interrupting the station's network. U.S. President Donald Trump has left the G7 meeting in Canada early to return to Washington as tensions escalate between Israel and Iran. The president's departure is fueling speculation there will be heavier Israeli strikes on Iran in the hours ahead. Reports from the G7 summit in Calgary.
It's not the first time he's done that. Back in 2018, when Canada last held the summit, he departed early, heading to Singapore to hold a summit with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He says this time it's all about the Middle East and the unfolding situation there. But it has prompted plenty of speculation as to why the US president believes he needs to be back in the US capital and not taking part in a second day of talks here in Canada. The question is all about whether this is a push for peace or putting the US on a footing for war. He has told his National Security Council to be ready. He's told them to get the Situation Room at the White House prepared for when he lands, and therefore there is some speculation that we could see an increase of Israeli strikes against Iran. Remember, just earlier the US president warned people in Tehran to evacuate immediately. We could potentially even see the US carrying out strikes of its own against Iran, or perhaps the US is simply getting ready in case Iran strikes back against US assets in the region. But there is also the potential that Donald Trump, who has suggested a truce between Israel and Tehran, is instead returning to Washington to push further in those negotiations. He's offered to mediate a ceasefire following 5 days of strikes and retaliatory strikes. But here in Canada, it means that the G7 now becomes the G6. Tuesday, day 2, was meant to be all about discussions on Ukraine. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, is here in Canada to take part in the summit as the Western allies push for peace in the more than 3-year war that has beset Ukraine. But it does mean that the G7 leaders who remain here for the summit will perhaps have their attention turned to a different region, the Middle East, rather than Ukraine, as they try and push for peace in another conflict that's besetting the world. Nick Harper, Calgary.
The G7 Leaders Summit is underway in Canonicus, Canada, with early divisions between the core group emerging from U.S. President Donald Trump, signaling he would not sign onto a joint statement calling for the de-escalation between Israel and Iran. On Monday's key session sought to tackle issues around the global economic outlook, including a decision by President Trump to impose unilateral tariffs on countries around the world. The escalating conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Iran was hard to circumvent, while President Cyril Ramaphosa is due to participate in the leaders' outreach session later today, which will be focused on energy security. Sharon Bryce-Peace has more.
Mr. President, thank you. Welcome to Canada. Bienvenue au Canada.
The host welcomed the G7 leaders to Canada before laying out a pathway for deliberations over the next 2 days, focused on promoting peace and security, building energy security and accelerating the digital transition, and security partnerships and investment for infrastructure and high-paying jobs. Mark Carney is Canada's Prime Minister and President of the G7.
We're meeting at one of those hinge moments, those turning points in history. The world's more divided and dangerous. Hostile states and terrorists have expanded their capabilities and their reach, threatening global security in our local communities. Global commerce, energy systems, even intelligence are all being rewired. Nostalgia isn't a strategy. We have to change with the times and to build a better world. And some of you, such as you, Mr. President, have anticipated these massive changes and are taking bold measures to address them. All of us around this table are reinforcing our militaries and security services for the new world. But we all know that there can be no security without economic prosperity, and no prosperity without resilience. And in a world where shocks flow across the borders, that resilience comes from cooperation that starts around this table.
Carney acknowledged that they might not agree on everything, but where there was cooperation, they would be able to make an enormous difference for their citizens, with reports that President Trump will not sign onto a call for de-escalation between Israel and Iran, while stating that Iran was ready to talk.
They'd like to talk, but they should have done that before. I had 60 days, and they had 60 days, and on the 61st day I said, we don't have a deal. They have to make a deal, and it's painful for both parties, but I'd say Iran is not winning this war, and they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
South Africa earlier indicating that under their G20 presidency, enhanced efforts had been undertaken to strategically align the objectives of the G7 with that of the G20, as the UN Secretary-General is also expected to participate in discussions. UN spokesperson Farhan Haq.
On Tuesday, he will take part in a session organized for G7 and invited leaders entitled Energy Security, Diversification, Technology and Investment to ensure access and affordability in a changing world. The Secretary-General will also hold bilateral meetings on the margins of the summit, including with the Prime Minister of Canada and G7 President Mark Carney.
President Ramaphosa expected to have a number of bilaterals with the President of South Korea, Lee Jae-myung, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and a trilateral meeting with the EU Council President Antonio Costa and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya.
The President will proceed to participate in the outreach session where he will put forward South Africa's objectives as well as issues of interest at a multilateral level, but also with individual G7 members. There will also be more bilateral meetings tomorrow with the EU, for example, a trilateral with both President Costa and President von der Leyen, seeking to build on the discussions that took place in Cape Town when they visited South Africa. There will also be a bilateral meeting with the Chancellor of Germany. Germany, as you know, is South Africa's third largest trading partner. And so will be, again, the President looking at the consolidation and the expansion of that trade relationship. So all in all, a major focus on trade, considering that the G7 holds over 25% of the world's GDP.
President Ramaphosa's engagements, both multilateral and South Africa focused in Canada. I'm Shervin Bryce Pease in New York.
Darubini ya Afrika na I am Henry Shakif.
Hawa wa Afrika Kusini wenye asili ya kizungu ambao wamepewa ukimbizi huko nchini Marekani. Je, nini chanzo cha wao kuomba ukimbizi nchini Marekani?
Wenyewe hawajaomba ukimbizi. Kuna shirika fulani inaitwa AfriForum, shirika mbili za wazungu ambao wanatetea haki ya wazungu hapa, AfriForum na Solidarity. Hao walienda Marekani kufanya kampeni kusema kwamba wazungu wananyanyaswa hapa Afrika Kusini, na walivyofanya hiyo kampeni serikali iweze kuwafuatilia kujua nini ambacho mnasema kwamba mnanyanyaswa.
Kuna namna ya wao kwamba wamepoteza uraia wa Afrika Kusini, na je, endapo Trump akamaliza muda wake madarakani, uhalali wao wa kuishi nchini Marekani ukoje?
Itakuwa vigumu, kifupi itakuwa vigumu wenyewe kupoteza uraia wao.
Darubini ya Afrika 11 kamili hadi 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
It is 21 after 12 Central African time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. A new joint United Nations report released by the World Food Programme and the Food Agriculture Organization has warned that people in 5 hunger hotspots around the world face extreme hunger and risk of starvation and death in the coming months unless there is urgent humanitarian action and a coordinated international effort to de-escalate conflict, stem displacement, and mount an urgent full-scale aid response. The latest hunger hotspots report shows that Sudan, Palestine, South Sudan, Haiti and Mali are hotspots of the highest concern, with communities already facing famine, at the risk of famine or confronted with catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity. More on the report from the WFP's DRC spokesperson, that's Shelley Takral.
So for the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I mean, unfortunately, the findings reveal a stark reality. And, you know, we have been in this turmoil of conflict, of a momentum of trying to have, political momentum for a ceasefire in the East. But the reality is that millions of people are caught up in this cycle of violence. And the cycle of violence then triggers a cycle of hunger. So across the country, 28 million people are facing acute hunger. And what does that mean? What does that mean for people? It means that they are often displaced. They don't have jobs. They have to look for alternative means to find money. And in some really acute, in some really severe instances, these are women who perhaps they have to go out and beg because they don't know how to feed their children. They sometimes resort to survival sex because they need food. They need to find food to feed their children. So that gross amount of displacement, let me give you an example. About 20 years ago, 1 million people were displaced. Now, in 2025, 8 million people have been displaced from their homes. And the majority are from the East, and many of them several times, multiple times, where they're, because of the fight for the land and because of this kind of ongoing conflict, which has just consumed generations. There are generations of people who just don't know any different.
So according to the report, which hotspots are of high concern?
So I can speak for the DRC. There are other countries in the hunger hotspot report which you are referring to, and that's Sudan, Palestine, South Sudan, Haiti, Mali. But we have a situation in the world right now in 2025 where 343 million people are hungry. Of those, malnutrition children who are suffering from, poor nutrition, 33 million. And, the statistics are they're just dreadful. Wasting 45 million, stunting 148 million, and children with obesity, 37 million. So when you have got countries in the world. And, and again, there's a very small margin. I mean, Afghanistan's up there. You have got severe hunger. In Sudan, 1 in 3 children suffer from acute malnutrition. In DRC, 1 in 4. So, this is really troubling for humanitarian workers globally, but more so in the DRC, because we always think of the DRC as it's a very complex country, it's a very difficult country, but it's a country of enormous opportunity. There's fertility here, plants grow, vegetables grow, but when you are embroiled in this conflict, which is just consuming people's lives, really poor infrastructure, and it's almost ignored because of resources and funding opportunities, and that just aggravates the issue. That just makes it even more difficult for people to recover from this, cycle of false hope, because they don't know, whether or not, they will recover, and will they one day be able to, live in a peaceful, food secure country, a food secure world.
What is your appeal then? What is it that you are calling for?
Honestly, we really need for stability to happen, because stability in DRC means stability for the region. Because this is also now, when you're seeing the conflict affecting families who are tipping into Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, when you've got refugees who are just fleeing into, in different directions. So we need a ceasefire. We need peace. We also need resources. We need money to fund our operations. And, the world is, most of the world is on fire right now, and a lot of governments have also, for whatever reason, they are perhaps focusing on different areas to put resources and where normally we would have relied more heavily on certain governments. So that's also a plea to the international community to please continue to give generously, and to realise that the people, especially in DRC and other parts of the world, really depend on the most generous contributions that we get. And we need to respect humanitarian principles. We need unimpeded access to places to reach people, and we need to be able to operate in a neutral and impartial way, as the United Nations and NGOs and other partners, so that we know how to do our job. We know how to deliver food respectfully, with dignity, decency, and we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to give people, and especially these women and these children, hope for a better future.
That was the WFP DRC spokesperson, Shirley Thakral. She was speaking to Nhlanhla Mahlangu.
Update on Channel Africa.
Well, continue with us on our social media platforms. That's on X, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. On Facebook at Channel Africa. You can also send us your comments and voice notes to +2763 at 406 9126 #Africa Updates, and let us know which country you're in. And if you have any comments or questions that you would like us to focus on, send us an email. It is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call on +27 11-714-4459. Now, on today's #Africa Update Ask, we focus on the Iran-Israel crisis. And our question is, what would you tell the leaders of Iran and Israel if you had their ear? Nigeria, Sudan, and South Africa are a few of the countries on the continent calling for peace in the Middle East. Now, what would you tell the leaders of Iran and Israel if you had their ear? Just send us your comments on all our social media platforms, and let's hear what you have to say. It is 12:29 Central African Time, and our news headlines up next with Noluthando Buthelezi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has posthumously pardoned the Ogoni 9, a group of environmental activists, among them the late Ken Saro-Wiwa, who were executed by a military regime nearly 3 decades ago. The South African National Defence Forces Chief Joint Operations Lieutenant General Sphiwe Sangweni says that concerns that soldiers from the Democratic Republic of Congo have come back without their weapons is misplaced. And Sudanese Prime Minister Kamil Idris has instructed the country's ambassador in Tehran to organize the safe evacuation of all Sudanese citizens. I'll be back with this and more at the top of the hour.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Well, thank you to Nolutando with our headlines, and we say good afternoon to Figile Lingwati with our sports update.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you and good afternoon, Lulu. We begin with football news. Tunisian heavyweights Esperance opened their 2025 FIFA Club World Cup campaign with a 2-0 defeat against Brazilian side Flamengo in Philadelphia on Monday night. The result that propelled the Copa Libertadores holders to the top of Group D alongside Chelsea after the first round of matches. Goals in either half from Georgian De Armagesteta and Luis Araujo proved decisive, condemning Esperance to defeat on their return to global competition. This also leaves the North African side needing a positive result against Los Angeles FC in their next fixture to keep qualification hopes alive. With 3 points secured and a clean sheet in tow, Flamengo now face Chelsea in a tantalizing encounter that may decide top spot. Esperance, meanwhile, sit level with LAFC on 0 points and must find great attacking edge if they are to prolong their United States adventure. Still on football news, Mamelodi Sundowns goalkeeper Dennis Onyango, one of the 3 surviving members of the last time the Tshwane Giants were in the FIFA Club World Cup, says the new format will be effective in the long run. The veteran keeper believes this to be a game changer.
What's different? I think it's the number of teams. The previous one had lesser numbers, and this Club World Cup has more than 30 teams, which makes it incredible because you've got to see a lot of quality players from all over the world, and of course the organization also is different from the one in 2016 because now you play group stages, and the previous one you were playing the knockout stages only, but now it gives you an opportunity to play.
Onyango adds that with more games comes the opportunity to give Africa, especially Sundowns, the chance to challenge the favorites.
The sky is the limit, is to give everything. You must give everything that you have on the pitch, leave every skin on the pitch. And I think that's the sky is the limit for us. It's to give our best, to try and play beautiful football, to entertain the people that are watching from all over the world, and to represent the continent in the best way.
On to cricket news. The stalwart of the Proteas women, Marizanne Kapp, and one of the greatest all-rounders in women's cricket, express her pride in the career she has built and the progress women's cricket has made since her debut in 2009. She earned her 150th one-day international cap for South Africa over the weekend in a match against the West Indies.
I'm extremely proud. I think looking back, not only on my career, but where women's cricket started, and when I started playing for South Africa, I didn't even know there was women's cricket, international women's cricket. When I made my debut, I just thought, I'll give this a go. Even though I've always absolutely loved cricket, I never thought women's cricket would end up here, and I would still be playing, I think 15, 16 years later, and I'm still here. So it's definitely a very proud moment, and hopefully I've got a few more games in me.
Let's wrap it up with tennis news. Taylor Fritz, who beat Alexander Zverev in the final at Stuttgart at the weekend to make a strong start to the grass court season, reclaimed his place in the top 4 in the ATP rankings. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 44 59. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fidel Ngwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Es-tu préoccupé par quelque chose? Es-tu passionné par les questions qui comptent? As-tu une voix qui mérite d'être entendue? Eh bien, nous avons la plateforme parfaite pour toi. Téléphone-nous ou fais-nous un WhatsApp au +27 66 408 87 42 et nous te rappellerons. Sois dans la conversation.
Salut Channel Africa, ici Beno le diamant rouge et Binal Sport depuis le Cameroun, le pays des lions. Voilà.
Sois dans la conversation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de parler, mais c'est ta chance d'exprimer ton point de vue, de partager tes opinions et de t'engager avec une communauté qui valorise ton avis. Suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux, visitez notre site www.channelafrica.co.za et préparez-vous à partager vos points de vue sur Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Well, thank you to Figile Ngwati with our sports update, and we say good afternoon to Nosipo Zuma with our business news.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good afternoon. In your business news this hour, JP Morgan has upgraded the Afrexim Bank's bonds to overweight from underweight today, citing valuations. This rating means that JP Morgan expects the bond will likely outperform its benchmark industry. The upgrade comes after ratings agency Fitch downgraded Afrimex Bank last week, drawing scrutiny from African stakeholders. Fitch downgraded the African Export-Import Bank's long-term issuer default rating from BBBB to BBBB-, assigning this negative outlook based on heightened risk exposure to Ghana, Zambia and South Sudan. Nhlanhla Mahlangu has more.
The African Trade and Development Lender has been at the center of a standoff over whether the loans it extended to these countries, two of which recently defaulted, are in the scope for restructuring or not. The downgrade led to criticism from the African Union's credit review body, which said the ratings was flawed and called for the decision to be reviewed. JP Morgan says the upgrade of the lender's bonds to overweight is as a result valuations in the wake of the Fitch downgrade. For Channel Africa News, I am Nhlanhla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
Meanwhile, ratings agency Fitch has raised Ghana's rating to B-, pushing it closer to investment grade. Fitch upgraded the rating from restricted default yesterday, saying that the country has normalized relations with a significant majority of its external commercial creditors. The gold-producing country is recovering from its most severe economic crisis in decades. Ghanaian President Dramani Mahama, who took office in January, has vowed to boost the economy and create jobs. The South African presidency has sought to clarify details surrounding the cost of the National Dialogue. This after the National Dialogue Preparatory Committee estimated that the initiative will cost over $43 million, resulting in a wave of criticism from trade unions, political parties and civil society. Now, the dialogue will begin with the National Convention scheduled for the 15th of August, followed by community engagements across the country. The aim of the dialogue is to discuss solutions to the country's challenges. Presidency spokesperson Vincent Makwenya.
There isn't a budget, there isn't a number or a cost that the government is committed to. All we have is what has been communicated as a proposal that the foundations have put forward. Now, the foundations are not going to be the fiscal custodians of this process. Government is going to be the fiscal custodian of the process. And government has not yet engaged in a process of formulating a budget. So therefore, the debate over 700 million rands is completely misplaced and completely unnecessary.
South Korea says it will step up efforts to secure a trade deal in negotiations with the United States in the next few weeks. Seoul's top negotiator said this today after political turmoil at home had dampened its progress in tariff talks. His comments came after South Korea's new president said that it was important for South Korea to remain competitive on tariffs with other countries. South Korea is currently subject to a blanket 10% tariff with a 25% country-specific duty, which are on pause for 90 days. And finally, the European Commission is set to propose today a ban on European Union imports of Russia gas and liquefied natural gas by the end of 2025, using legal measures to ensure the plan cannot be blocked by EU members Hungary and Slovakia. The proposals will set out how the European Union plans to fix into law its vow to end decades-old energy relations with Europe's former top gas supplier Russia, made after Moscow's 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Your financial indicators: $1 US in Nigeria is trading at 1,544 naira 28. In Botswana, it's 13 bula 23. Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 39. And in Zambia, it's 24 kwacha 17. The BRICS countries: $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 ruble 52. Russia is 78 rubles 69. India is 86 rupees 02. China at 7 yuan 18. And in South Africa, $1 is trading at 17 rand 83. $1 is trading at 73 pence to the British pound and 86 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $3,387 and platinum at $1,236 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $73.58 a barrel. Now, for any business news stories you would like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Nosipho Zuma.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802. Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
Well, thank you to Nosipho Zuma with our business news. It is 12:42 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. The United Nations Women and United Nations Trust Fund has convened the second multi-stakeholder dialogue on feminist funding for women's movements in the East and Southern Africa at the Premier Hotel in Midrand, that's in the Gauteng province of South Africa. The dialogue will engage women rights organizations, feminist funders, UN agencies and other development partners, as well as relevant private sector partners, to find out what these discussions aims to achieve. Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe is attending this dialogue, and he is joined by Sunita Kamina, who is the policy specialist on ending violence against women from the United Nations Women East and Southern Africa office. Michael, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lulu, and good afternoon, the continent of Africa. But Lulu, just a short one, because the person that we're supposed to speak to is part of the panel. They are wrapping up, but just in a nutshell, this is to do with the regional dialogue on feminist funding for women's movements in Eastern and Southern Africa, where they're discussing about, progress made from the previous conference that happened, and it's all about empowering the women, because women are going through a lot of issues, being in violence, they're being violated, their rights are being violated. We can see the conflicts that are ravaging, the continent of Africa. So, but also, there is a lot of pushback. That's what they're talking about here, pushback from, male counterparts in terms of implementing, those policies that have been agreed to If you can just hold, I think our speaker now is on her way to speak to us, Lulu.
As you make your way to meet with Sunita, what else can you tell us about this event? How long is it going to be running for, and what the expected outcomes are going forward? And especially when it comes to the implementation, we see a lot of summits, we see a lot of talk shops, but when it comes to implementation and deliverables?
Yes, Lulu, let me just cut you there. I'm now joined by Sunita. Yes, Sunita, thank you so much for joining us. You're live at on SABC's Channel Africa. Just a quick one, because as I was speaking, waiting for you, but unfortunately you were still busy, but you could understand that. In a nutshell, the importance of this conference.
This conference is the second regional dialogue on feminist funding for women's movements. It is part of a partnership between UN Women, the UN Trust Fund, in collaboration with the European Union, as a build-on to recognize the importance of women's movements towards advancing gender equality and in this moment of backlash that we're seeing. This is a 3-year program which it recognizes we need to work in partnership with women's rights organizations to collectively strengthen the advocacy and the coalitions for impactful efforts to end violence against women and girls. The conversation today and over the next couple of days is bringing together women's rights organizations across the region, as well as feminist philanthropies, bilateral, multilateral donors, including the UN system, private sector partners, to say, how do we come together? And we heard from the minister's remarks this morning of South Africa that we need to work in partnerships. We know that coalitions are the way that we need to move forward and coming from a united front to address the backlash.
Looking at, we have been having a lot of conferences. It's conference after conference, but the needle is not shifting.
Yeah.
I was listening to some of the panelists talking about, it looks like there's a pushback from, policies that you're advocating for, but they're not being, implemented by male count. Can you take us through that?
Yes, and I think it was also shared this morning that this is not the first time that we're seeing pushback. This is a sign of progress, actually, that over the course of history, we have seen when there has been an effort to shift power. The reason that we see violence against women and girls and gender inequality is because of the power imbalances, because patriarchal structures that exist. And the resistance to shifting those structures is where we're seeing the pushback and where we're seeing that indeed these conversations are needed, because part of that pushback is to divide different efforts, is to divide organizations, is to prevent those conversations from happening. But when we come together, we start to build trust, we start to see the connections between the efforts and build that solidarity. And we know historically from resistance movements to address oppression that solidarity actually leads to change.
And of course also something that took center stage is the conflicts that are ravaging in Sudan, and we heard one of the women taking center stage and talking about the issues that are grappling with when these conflicts are ravaging.
Yes, indeed. We need to recognize that there is a link between the peace and stability that is being threatened and the reduced funding that's going to women's rights organizations and to gender equality, because there is a clear attack around democracy that comes with the attacks on women's rights organizations. And when we don't have those rights protected, we don't have the basic fundamental freedoms of women and girls to be free in their bodies, to be free in their communities, in their homes, then we can't expect to see peace in our communities, in our countries at wide. And so we have to recognize that in order to get to that peace and stability, we have to fund and start with the fundamental freedoms at home.
In closing our interview, for how long it's going to run, and what are you looking forward to achieve?
So this conference is going today and tomorrow. We'll continue to bring together conversations around how we're addressing backlash, learning from good practices, going into some more critical elements around collective care, around building collaboration and connections. What we hope to come out with is some concrete actions that funding partners, that women's rights organizations, the private sector, and in collaboration with governments can take, and the UN system as a whole, of how we can move forward. We will continue these conversations. It's not the first or the last, but we do believe it will lead to meaningful change.
Thank you so much. We leave it there. Thank you so much, Lulu. That was Sunita just giving us, highlighting to us on what is happening here at the Women Regional Dialogue on Feminist funding for women movements here at the Premier Hotel in Midrand. Back to the studio.
Michael, thank you for that interview, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update. That was Channel Africa reporter Michael Mbewe joining us on the line.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
Now, earlier we spoke of the G7 Leaders Summit being underway in Canada, and a call for a ceasefire having been made as tensions between Israel and Iran escalate over the last few days. We've seen the exit of the US President Donald Trump leaving the G7 meeting in Canada early, returning to Washington as tensions escalate between Israel and Iran. Now, with that, the president's departure is fueling speculation there will be heavier Israeli strikes on Iran in the hours ahead. And in a statement, the G7 leaders reiterated their commitment to peace and stability in the Middle East. And for more on the conflict between Israel and Iran, we are joined on the line by Patrick Kadima, a lecturer at Wits University. Patrick, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you, and good afternoon to your listeners.
Now, Patrick, is Iran's nuclear program the real reason for this conflict? Just give us some historical background, but very briefly.
Yeah, I don't think it's the real reason for the conflict. I think also there has been instances, due to the tensions that are happening in the Middle East, with Israel having conflicts or disagreements with its neighbors. So I don't think it's just the nuclear issue, because if it was if that was the issue, then that would have been dealt with by multilateral organizations.
Now, what does Israel's targeting of Iran's nuclear plants mean for geopolitics? We've heard, statements. We've seen other countries' leaders basically in saying that Israel has a right to defend itself. Just take us through that and make us understand exactly what this means.
So, if one country has the right to defend itself, it's defending itself from what? That's the first question one should pose, right? You defend yourself when there's an attack, right? And that's guaranteed in the UN Charter, right? But what Israel is saying is not a defense that can be acceptable under the UN Charter as it is currently. And attacking these nuclear power stations, industries, is problematic, because we know the dangers that nuclear can pose, when not managed properly, right? We have seen that with history, long time back, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki times, right? So if they continue doing that, then it might cause consequences that might not only be felt in Iran, but everywhere, in the Middle East as well as globally.
Now, what is at stake for Iran's nuclear program? And do they really know what Iran has?
No, I don't think Israel knows, right? Countries are sovereign. They do say what they do. They do say what they do say, but you never know what are the capabilities of one country, or what they are capable of doing, and such issues are managed through the IAEA, right? It's a multilateral international organization that looks to the issue of nuclear programs and countries that have nuclear programs going on to manage those expectations, right? And if the organization believes that a certain country is going overboard, then they try by all means to try negotiate, put diplomacy there, negotiate and so on and so forth. But then you never know at the end of the day what capabilities a country such as Iran has. So it's also dangerous from the side of attacking these power stations and these sites and not knowing the repercussions, that it can be very, very, very dangerous.
Just going back a few days ago, the IAEA board, they've declared Iran to be in breach of non-proliferation obligations. And this then prompted Israel to act in the manner that they've acted.
I don't think Israel should be acting in the manner that should be acting. That you leave to the multilateral system to deal with, right? Because countries are sovereign and countries enter into treaties with different member states to adhere to principles. So that is a multilateral issue. It's not an issue of a country to decide that because the IAEA said something, then you decide. That is for multilateral institutions, the United Nations, the United Nations Security Council, the Arab League, to decide what to do. Right, not for one country to take it upon itself to decide what should be the action taken.
Now, if the U.S. has come out and denied any involvement in the latest Israel attacks on Iran, could there be a shift in relations between President Trump's administration and Israel, but also the fact that President Trump has left the G7 summit and gone back to the White House, to the U.S. basically, and saying that he needs to focus on the Middle East crisis? What should be read into this whole situation?
There's absolutely nothing that tells me that America will not stand by Israel. The fact that he left the G7 summit to probably go deal with that issue says it all, that he will stand by Israel, all the time, and we've seen if he left without putting his signature on this declaration, it means a lot. It means that America is not willing to use its influence to find a peaceful and diplomatic solution to the matter that is happening there, which is very, very, very sad at the moment, because if this can become a fully blown regional conflict, then not only the Middle East is going to suffer, there will be a humanitarian disaster happening there, but it's going to have repercussions in the African continent. It's going to have repercussions in Europe, and so on and so forth. Whether the repercussions are that of oil prices going up, or a humanitarian crisis where people are fleeing, refugees and asylum seekers trying to find peaceful places to stay in, those are some of the things that we'll have to wait and see.
Patrick, just in wrapping up with some of the world leaders, including South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, who are currently attending the G7 summit in Canada, what are some of the discussions that might be held regarding this conflict?
May you please repeat that question for me?
I was just trying to find out what the leaders that have remained behind at the summit could be discussing even more when it comes to the Israel-Iran crisis and obviously the impact on the world.
Yeah, look, you have one of the most influential presidents who has left. You leave 6 members and outreach member states that have been invited. As much as they would want to push for a diplomatic solution, it will be very difficult, because if you don't get consensus from all the states, the G7, for example, then it brings in, it waters down, right? It waters down. There's no consensus. It waters down. Israel knows that, America is standing by it and it can do what it wants. But if it was the other way around, where America had signed it off, then it will know that here we need to probably have a diplomatic solution. So I think whatever the rest of the G6 now is, the G7, with minus America and the outreach member states that are there, they can release a statement all they want. I don't think it's going to bring about a peaceful process. That will need
Patrick,
America on the table.
thank you for your time on Africa Update. That's Patrick Kadima, a lecturer at Wits University, joining us on the line. And we say good afternoon to the Upside team with Deboho Likoleni joining us in studio. Good afternoon and happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday to you too, Lulu. So what's coming up on the show this afternoon, we decode the difference between dry and dehydrated skin. Apparently there is a difference. I didn't know. And we're in winter now, so we decode what that actually means. And then we meet literacy advocate Murende Nefale, who's on a mission to make books a birthright in every township and classroom in South Africa. And then finally, South African tourism is taking storytelling globally as we unpack their big win at Africa's top tourism film festival this afternoon. All that coming up on The Upside.
That's coming up at the top of the hour on The Upside with Tebohole Kuleni and Nompumelelo Ngubeni. For myself, Lulu Gaboo and the Africa Update team, continue with us on our social media platforms, and thank you to our producer Tracy Bumgard, our technical operator Mondli Mdambo, and social media Nzako Mashaba. It's been a great day. Let's do this again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
With the news at 1 o'clock, good afternoon. I am Nolutando Butelezi. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has posthumously pardoned the Ogoni 9, a group of environmental activists, among them the late Ken Saro-Wiwa, who were executed by a military regime nearly 3 decades ago for protesting oil pollution in the Niger Delta. But the move has been met with sharp criticism from Ogoni leaders who say that a mere pardon falls short of justice. Nigeria coordinator of the Ogoni Solidarity Forum, Celestine Okpobari.
The president of Nigeria is one of the most powerful presidents in the world. So what I expected Mr. President to do, if he has no power to exonerate, was to set up a judicial panel of inquiry to do a review of the kangaroo trial, to look at the trial of Justice Auta and do a review of what happened, how the lawyers of Ken Saro-Wiwa were chased out of the tribunal. All those things, they're supposed to look at it, and I know that such a panel will recommend exoneration. I also would have loved Mr. President to set up another panel to look at the military occupation of Ogoni land, how the military occupied our land, because those that committed genocide in Ogoni are walking freely on the streets of Nigeria. It shouldn't be.
The South African National Defence Forces Chief Joint Operations Lieutenant General Siphiwe Sangweni says that concerns that soldiers from the Democratic Republic of Congo have come back without their weapons is misplaced. General Sangweni says that 80% of the SANDF equipment and weapons have already been moved to Tanzania, and the process of bringing them back home is likely to take months. He said